Welcome to the New Life Ministries podcast. We can tend to want to stay bitter in how we regard a leader or ruler we dislike or disagree with. But this sermon will be about how to be wise when relating with leaders that are corrupt or we dislike. We will also be reminded and comforted that God is in control and has a plan even with an unfair reality at play. Let's take a look.
So welcome. Today we're going to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 8, page 1007. And to those of you listening to the recording, I'm glad you've joined us. I hope you enjoy this. So my buddy this week was going out of town to visit with a former boss and some work colleagues, and he asked that I would pray about some specific things. And then later, I noticed that his profile picture had changed. And in the profile picture, he's sitting beside a gentleman in these lovely leather chairs, and I can see my buddy's face, but I can only see the back of the other guy's face. And I'm looking at the picture, and I'm looking kind of at the room, and I'm thinking, if I didn't know better, I would say that's Prime Minister Trudeau. Like it just looked somehow very official. Said nothing. Later in the day, my friend sends me a text to say the meeting had gone really well, really thankful. And he goes, and then while we were together, God coordinated a sudden meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau, and he walked in and sat down with us. Yeah. This guy works in different circles than he lives in different circles than I live. It's so funny. I haven't met with him yet to say, so what were you talking about? But we'll get there. So in the world of politics, which is what we're going to talk about today, have you ever heard the phrase, not my president? Or not my king? It's a phrase that showed up, I'm not exactly sure where, but it became popular when George Bush beat Al Gore for the US presidency, but George Bush had not won the popular vote. And it became this phrase, not my president. And people were saying, he doesn't represent me, I didn't vote for him. And there's also a tone of, I don't want him. Like, this isn't what I want. And I thought this week, boy, what if a king or a leader took the same approach with us? Not my people. If the king was to say, not my people, like, I don't respect them, I don't care about them, like, wow, would that open the door to trouble? So the passage today talks about wisdom in the realm of politics, and specifically wisdom when relating to the king. Now, the king in a kingdom is the writer's setting. We need to translate that to our own setting. So what is it to be wise when relating with the head of a government? Or when you're relating to any leader that you're obligated to? So perhaps your boss, or someone who leads a volunteer group or a community group that you're part of, or someone in the government bureaucracy that you have to report into. Any authority that in some way you're obligated to, what is wisdom to relate to that person? And the Bible does not assume that that person is by nature basically good. In fact, the Bible sort of assumes that kings and leaders and people in authority are just as sinful and self-seeking as any other human. So how do you relate with wisdom when the person who has some real authority or power isn't necessarily good and doesn't do good things? So that's kind of what the passage is going to deal with today. Good? Whatever phone just beeped? Let me offer a prayer, and we'll begin. Father, once again, would you speak to us through your word? Would you draw our attention to what it is you want each of us to see and to notice? And may we be drawn to praise you and be drawn to see the goodness in you. Amen. So Ecclesiastes chapter 8. How wonderful to be wise, to analyze and interpret things. Wisdom lights up a person's face. It softens its harshness. I love that line, eh? Wisdom softens its harshness. Obey the king, since you vowed to God that you would. Don't try to avoid your duty, and don't stand with those who plot evil, for the king can do whatever he wants. His command is backed by great power. No one can resist it or question it. Those who obey him will not be punished. Those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what is right, for there is a time and a way for everything, even when a person is in trouble. Indeed, how can a person avoid what they don't know is going to happen? None of us can hold back our spirit from departing. None of us has the power to prevent the day of our death. There is no escaping that obligation, that dark battle. And in the face of death, wickedness will certainly not rescue the wicked. I have thought deeply about all that goes on here under the sun, where people have the power to hurt each other. I have seen wicked people buried with honor, yet they were the very ones who frequented the temple and are now praised in the same city where they committed their crimes. This too is meaningless. When a crime is not punished quickly, people feel it is safe to do wrong. But even though a person sins 100 times and still lives a long time, I know that those who fear God will be better off. The wicked will not prosper, for they do not fear God. Their days will never grow long like the evening shadow. And this is not all that is meaningless in our world. In this life, good people are often treated as though they were wicked, and wicked people are often treated as though they were good. This is so meaningless. So I recommend having fun, because there's nothing better for people in this world than to eat, drink, and enjoy life. That way they will experience some happiness along with all the hard work God gives them under the sun. In my search for wisdom and in my observation of people's burdens here on earth, I discovered there is ceaseless activity day and night. I realized no one can discover everything God is doing under the sun. Not even the wisest people discover everything, no matter what they claim. So I'd like for us to see this whole passage as relating to thoughts on the king and the king's authority. It includes different suggestions on what to do with some warnings and some frustrations. But the passage is not actually changing subjects as it goes along. It's just speaking to different parts of the whole, dealing with the person's power, the power that has some unjust behavior, how to live under it, how to think about following God and what God is doing in this context. So one of my pastor friends was talking to a person who moved here from another country, and the country had a king. And the person said to my friend, "You don't understand the difference. A king, even in a country, is sovereign. The king is free to do whatever he wants. He is above the law. He makes the law. He is not bound by the laws that we are bound to." And I thought that was so interesting because our leaders are bound to laws and they are accountable to us. We can remove them if we want, if we work together, but that is not true for a king. What is it like to be faithful to God and live well under that kind of authority where someone is free to do whatever they want? And I thought maybe an example for us would be if somebody has created a business and grown a business to have many employees, they are free to do with that business whatever they want. It's their business. They don't have to defend their actions to their employees. But maybe that would be something similar for us. So how do we work with that person, that king, that boss, who perhaps does things we don't agree with and makes decisions that we perhaps think are wrong? And to add to the complexity, what if we are bound to follow that person? Because a king might require a vow of loyalty to serve in the kingdom or to serve in the palace. It helps the king guarantee his safety and his prosperity. And if you're not going to be loyal to the king, you will be out of the kingdom or at least out of the palace. So for us, an employer, a boss, might require certain promises from their employees at the risk that if you don't do these promises, you'll be sued or you'll be fired. So today, we have non-disclosure agreements that forbid a person from speaking about a particular topic. Or there might be no moonlighting clauses, like you are forbidden from taking another job while you work for us. And I thought even, if you were talking to a person at CRA, the Canada Government, Canadian Revenue Agency, and if you sound a little hostile, they will hang up on you. And you will have to wait and go through the whole cycle to get their attention again. We are bound to follow their authority, whether we like it or not. Even if they're doing something we disagree with, if we sound hostile, they'll just hang up on you, even if you don't think you're being hostile. So that might be, something that would be akin. So what is it to be wise in these environments, especially if we don't like what they're doing? So the passage then starts with something very unexpected. It says, the king's power is real. Verse 3 and 4, the king can do whatever he wants. His command is backed by great power. No one can resist it or question it. Like the passage doesn't say, oh, the king is just a person, just do what you want. The passage says the king's power is real. It affects you. You are not in control. You do not have equal power. The passage does not say fight back and try to get power over him. You might be able to do that in some situations, but not all. How do you live well with our short time on earth in this kind of situation? So I thought one of our struggles with authority, and one of the reasons we really bark at authority and we fight with people in authority, is the belief that they should or they're going to support our agenda. Like as they lead, that they're going to take care of me and my needs, that they're going to listen to me. Like that's kind of one of our assumptions. And if we see evidence that it's true, that they are going to care for us, we can get really supportive. Like, this is the government then that we should follow. This is the government that's going to do good. We should do what they say. Or this is a great boss because this boss really focuses on his employees. Or my caseworker is really for me. And if it looks like that's not true, we will have a different reaction. We might get a little nasty. We try to change our boss. We try to change our caseworker. Perhaps what we need to consider is that the person in authority likely has other things on their mind than our well-being. Like they've got other things going on than our agenda. And so therefore, don't make them into your God. Like, don't make them into some being or some object that is going to absolutely get you what you want. You have a different God. These are people. They play a role, and God has decided to let them be in that position of authority, but they are not our ultimate source of blessing. They are not at the top. So we have to let them just be human. And a human who makes mistakes, a human who might do wicked things, even if they hurt us, but they're not our God. And when we see them or we push them into that godlike role, we can get more frustrated and more hurt. With me? So that's really easy for me to say. Our text, though, doesn't make light of the potential harm a person in authority, a king, a boss, really can have. So verse 2, he says, obey. Obeying is only difficult when we really disagree with what's going on. You made a vow to be loyal, which means you might be called to do something you really disagree with. Verse 3, don't avoid your duty. Verse 4, his command is backed by great power. No one can resist or question it. Verse 5, those who obey him will not be punished, which means those who don't obey might be punished. And then in verse 7, indeed, how can people avoid what they don't know is going to happen? It's this idea, you can't just decide you're going to avoid those situations which will be difficult and hard to navigate. Like you can't get yourself out of the room if you don't know the conversation's coming. So sometimes you're just in a place and trouble happens and you've got to obey something you really think is wrong. What do you do in these awful no-win situations? So remember in the book of Matthew, Jesus said that we had to be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. That's the path. Shrewd, be smart, be clever in your thinking, be cunning, keep your wits, move carefully. So it says in verse 3, don't avoid your duty and don't stand with those who plot evil against the king or against the boss. Verse 8, in the face of death, wickedness will not rescue the wicked. And I love that line. If you serve the path of wickedness, it'll not rescue you. If you do bad because that's how you're going to get out of this, in the end, wickedness has got a hold on you. You won't be rescued. Doing bad will not get you good. And yet, for what this passage says, what are our actual natural tendencies when a boss or someone is doing things we don't like? Well, we just might stop working and try to get out. Passage says, obey. We might try to confront them and to thrust our opinion in their face and demand that they answer for themselves. The passage says, the king can do what he wants. We might start to think of how we can get the person out of their position of power, or we think of what harm we could do to them, or we try to get other colleagues on our side to, fight the boss or fight the power. The passage says, don't do that. Our natural tendency is not the way of wisdom. Instead, it says to stay, honor your commitment and your pledges, and navigate through this without doing evil. Verse 5, those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what is right, for there is a time and a way for everything, even when a person is in trouble. So there is a path through the trouble. Figure out how to speak to the person, figure out what to do to ease the tension. A couple of hints on this from my own experience of dealing with people in power. Respect goes a long way. Speaking, writing with respect to the other person really helps. Or to put it another way, being disrespectful and rude doesn't help. You want to show value to the person in authority. You want to let them know you value them, you respect them, and you are not their threat. Because if they realize you're not threatening them, they're more likely to lower their defenses and be willing to listen to whatever it is you're trying to say. Another way of looking at this is don't try to exalt yourself in front of them, expecting them to change because of you. If someone was trying to do that to you, if someone was trying to exalt themselves in front of you and push their power so that you obey them, would it work? Would it work especially if you were the one who actually was in power? So let's say you've got a child and your child is really disrespectful and demands that you do things their way. Doesn't that a little bit put your guard up and get you a little bit, there's a word I probably need here, perstickety? So there is a way to navigate through hard situations, and respect really helps. But the text then also offers a change in perspective. Verse 9, I have thought deeply about all that goes on here under the sun, when people have the power to hurt each other. I have seen wicked people buried with honor, and yet they were the same ones who frequented the temple and are now praised in the same city where they committed their crimes. This too is meaningless. You can hear he's frustrated by this. When crime is not punished quickly, people feel it is safe to do wrong. He's just so frustrated that people don't call out wickedness. Why does this happen? Why, when there's a ruler who's bad and then he dies, do we speak like the ruler was good? But sometimes wickedness gets away with it. And so he says in verse 12, even though a person sins 100 times and still lives a long time, I know those who fear God will be better off. The wicked will not prosper, for they do not fear God. Their days will never grow long like an evening shadow. So remember, kings die, leaders change, bosses leave, crises end. In the end, even if they live for a long time, their existence is limited. And that line about evening shadows, the commentators are pretty clear that that's a reference to life after death, that the wicked don't prosper after death. Prosperity has limits because they are living against the ways of the living God. And I was thinking this week, as I pondered this message, how weird it is that we as humans live in revolt to our Creator. Like that's our base way of behaving, that we reject his ways, we fight against him, we want it to be our way. It's like, really that we ignore values God put into creation like compassion and mercy and love, all for the sake of, I am going to make it, I am going to be great. Even if you watch creation for a period of time, creation works together. Animals work with each other. Even if animals are hunting animals, they have other animals they're working with. We don't do that. We live against the ways of our Creator. But there's another perspective change he offers, and that is the wisdom to accept that God does things, or God corrects injustice in ways we just don't understand. That God works his justice in ways we don't get. Verse 16, in my search for wisdom and in my observation of people's burdens here on earth, I discovered there is ceaseless activity day and night, and I realized no one can discover everything God is doing under the sun. Not even the wisest person can discover everything, no matter what they claim. How is it that God can let a king rule who brings harm to people, who behaves wickedly and yet still goes to the temple? And we get that, right? Where people might go to church regularly and then through the week they behave in ways that don't at all agree with the ways of Jesus. How can God let that authority continue? He works in ways we just don't understand. One writer said this line, he said, it's not the ultimate justice of God that the teacher doubts. It's his ability to understand how that justice works out in practice. And I loved how that line echoed for me. It's not the ultimate justice of God that the teacher doubts. It's his ability to understand how that justice works out in practice. So the writer of Ecclesiastes is not saying that the universe is not governed by a good moral being. He's just saying how it works out is beyond his ability to comprehend. And that's where wisdom is. That's where freedom is. I'm just not going to fully grasp how God is working this out. So there's no point staying up for hours, fretting and worrying and making myself sick. I just am not going to figure it out. My friend wrote a letter this week, and in it she writes, she was quoting Proverbs 3 that said, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend on your own understanding. Like, that's it. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you the path to take. So now Jesus in the New Testament expands our thinking, right? The New Testament's written after this time that this book was written. And Jesus teaches us God is patient, giving us time to come to our senses and to repent and to follow him. And the New Testament continues its teaching by saying there is a day of accounting that is coming, and all wickedness and unrighteousness will be called out and removed and stopped. But we're not there yet. So in trusting God's goodness and justice, and yet knowing we won't figure it out, we can have peace. And in that peace, we can have fun. And we can eat and drink and enjoy life. So what is catching your attention in this passage? What is encouraging you? Let me just highlight some stuff. Sometimes we're in a situation where the king, our boss, is doing something we just don't like or agree with. What is wisdom? First, don't see them as your God. Your ultimate well-being is not in their hands. Second, don't participate in evil against them. Shrewd as snakes, but innocent as doves. 3, those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what is right, for there is a time and a way. So respect goes a long way. Have a change of perspective. Evil does not win. Evil will not reign forever. God will work justice, but we might not figure out how that justice works out. God just might not explain it to us. So we can let it go and then rest and laugh and have fun. Wisdom lightens up a person's face, softening its harshness. So what's catching your attention? What encourages you in this passage?
There are parts of this that I can't swallow.
And yet there's other parts that are exactly what you would like.
Yeah. I refuse to be complicit in evil when it's demanded of me. I've been in that situation, and I refused.
So what happened?
I get fired.
Okay.
That was better off being fired than being obedient. And I think that there are often situations like that. This pastor speaks of not being complicit in evil, and yet turns around and kind of expects it. We have to remember, despite all this talk of allegiance to the king, our allegiance is to God. And we have to make the choice whether we're going to be true to God or the king.
Great.
Ecclesiastes seems to have this beautiful way of drawing us to the conclusion that we're not going to get it. That the way the world works and the way that God continues to acknowledge our independence, our ability to choose, and sticks with that promise not to force us to do anything, and yet still works through. We're not going to be able to figure all of that out. And that's where wisdom begins. I'm like, wait, hang on. Wisdom begins at the end of our rope?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it starts. It starts with, wow, this is way more than I can fathom. Okay, God, you got it from here.
Lovely.
This is such an interesting idea, the idea of having fun. In the context of caring for folks, many of whom are going through such difficult things, when there's injustice that is systemic, when there are people dying young, it is hard to work in that context and feel like you have the right to have fun. But I've come separate to this passage, come to realize that if I'm not having fun, then I'm really not able to demonstrate God's sovereignty and his lordship over all of this. And if I'm not able to have fun, what would anybody want with what I'm offering or what I'm talking about, right? So I'm learning, I'm learning that that's part and parcel of what I have to factor into my life is I have to have fun, even though these are very hard times for many of my folks.
Nice.
What happened in my reserve for the last 25 years is that we as a youth think of our elders of the community, we don't respect them anymore because we see them as default, and then it grows from where eventually they fall down and just don't want to teach anymore. Because God put them there for a reason, to learn from them what is good. But we lost that because they just want to pray by themselves and continue living. Because we see them as somebody that wants riches and their selflessness. They turn away from the community that they're supposed to be teaching with wisdom because we, in return, stop listening to them. And then we wonder, how do we teach our children to listen to us as old people, as parents, when we don't even listen to our elders? We never see that God put them there so we can learn and enrich our community. Instead, many of our people are now astray. I like what you said about we should listen to the king or the government or the community elders because God put them there. And we are supposed to get wisdom, not do the way that we did, like disrespect them because of what they did that we saw as wrong.
Thanks.
So, thank you. That was very interesting. I had never thought of this section as saying you can't make change. You can't push against things that are wrong. What always had caught my mind was where it says, Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure, for there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him. So, what that has always said to me was, it doesn't matter whether you're upset about something. Feelings don't matter exactly. They matter, but they can't drive change. And that by using wisdom and looking to those who are wise and who you are able to depend on to be wise, you can see when change is necessary and how to do that effectively. And what it was drawing my attention to this morning was a power struggle that's going on in my household right now with a very small little boy who is being weaned and who, because of that, is desperately upset. And so he is making it known. He is making his misery everyone's misery. And just that feelings don't mean that the things that are going on are bad. They just mean that you're upset. Because the reason he is being weaned is important, and it's valid, and it's for health for everybody. And so the pushing back against that is not wise, but it is human. Yep. And humans are not inherently super wise. And so that was what was happening in my brain this morning.
Lovely. Lovely. Let me offer a prayer, and then we'll close with a song. Father, I appreciate that your word has these passages where you speak to these situations that seem to have no way out or no quick right answer. I appreciate that your word really dallies into all the different things we encounter in life. Father, I also love this idea that you are going to work in ways we don't understand, and that's okay. And that if we can just accept your sovereignty and your goodness and just accept that you are doing things and are at work, we have freedom to rest and laugh and have joy and just be. Lord, may your sovereignty be impressed on us more and more. That we would, Lord, in the ways you talk with us, that we would be drawn to understand your power, your goodness, just who you really are. And by understanding who you are, that we would rest and we would respond appropriately and be the people you want us to be as we live this life. So thank you for this passage. Help us to obey it, to follow it, so that we bring glory to your name by being the people you want us to be. So thank you. We love you. Amen.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. New Life Ministries is located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. You are invited to join our service in person or over Zoom. Please use the Contact Us link to send an email to the church office and request the address or Zoom link. If you would like to use these podcasts as part of your home church or local church gathering, you are free to do so. We do request that you let us know. If there is any other way that we can help you in your ministry, please send us an email.